Voice. So what is Spring and why Spring? We know about some frameworks. I think you might have already worked with some frameworks like Struts, or if you have worked with something like JSF, etc. But why Spring? Why should we learn Spring? Let's talk about why Spring with a simple example. I just give a scenario. Based on that, I will introduce you what is Spring. The person who introduced Spring is Mr. Rod Johnson. Why he introduced Spring? Let us see. In every application, there will be layers, right? We'll be layering our applications. So the downmost layer will be the data access layer, which will be interacting with the database. This is the database. Data access layer will be interacting with the database. On top of it, if you are using some persistent frameworks like Hibernate or JPA, on top of DL will be persistence frameworks. Or if you are not using persistence frameworks, on top of DL, data access layer will be service layer or business layer we call it. Here we will write all our services, the business classes. And on top of it generally will be presentation layer, right? So generally all our applications will be layered at least into 3 basic layers. There might be some sub layers also according to your design. When we have layered in this layer, there will be some classes. We call them as DAOs or DAOs. We will be writing all our database related code in DAOs, right? Here we will be writing some DAOs. And here we will be writing some services, the classes which contain the business logic. And here we will be writing the views. If you are using a web application, the view might be a JSP, or if you are using a desktop application, it might be a Spring or AWS application, right? So now, when it is layered, one layer will be having a dependency on another layer. Like if your business logic has to execute, might be it needs to extract some data from database. So generally, the layer on the top will be dependent on the downmost layer. Presentation layer will be dependent on service layer. Service layer will be dependent on data access layer. So generally in our code, there will be some dependencies, right? Now, Spring talks about how to handle such dependencies. Let me see with a simple example. Just run through this presentation with a simple example. Let's assume that we have a table called as employee table. For simplicity, very simple scenario, we have an employee table in my database where it is having some columns, ID, name, salary, city, country, etc. I want to perform some operations on my employee table, like inserting an employee, deleting an employee, or updating an employee. So let's assume that I started with an interface. So I declared an interface called as employee DAO, data access object, which will have some signatures, insert, update, delete, right? Then what we will do? I have written an implementation of employee DAO using JDBC. Here no code. Assume that there is some JDBC code. Generally, whenever we start, it's always a good thing to start from the downmost layer. I started from downmost layer. I define one interface and I define one implementation using JDBC. Then coming to top layer, service layer. Again, I define an interface in service layer, employee service. I want to perform some insert operations or update operations or delete operations, so I have these simple methods. And I'm writing the implementation of employee service. Now employee service is having the implementation for insert, delete, update, right? Here what we'll do is we'll write some business logic. Before invoking our data access layer, before calling a method employee DAO, we'll be writing some business logic. And finally calling the DAO if required, right? So here in service, I wrote a variable called as employee DAO of type, employee DAO using JDBC, and I initialize this variable with this object, right? And here assume that there will be some code which will be invoking methods on employee DAO, right? A simple scenario which is common in all the applications. But is this code good? Are there any problems in this design of my application? Just two classes I wrote and two interfaces. But I find some problems here in this design. Anyone can point out what is the problem in this design? My employee service, will it work? Will it work without this JDBC implementation of DAO? No. So here the variable type is employee DAO using JDBC. I can say that my employee service implementation is dependent on employee DAO using JDBC, right? So here service class is dependent on DAO, right? Now the requirement changes. Of course, in software, we always sometimes follow agile methodology, where the requirements may change after going to some point. So let's assume that we wanted to use Hibernate as our persistent, Hibernate in our DAO layer, data access layer. Instead of using plain JDBC, we want to use Hibernate tomorrow. The main intention of dividing our application into layers is when one layer changes, the other layer should not be impacted. That's the main thing, right? So if some changes occur in data access layer, that should not impact service layer. That's the main motive behind dividing our application into layers, right? So here tell me, if I tomorrow decide to use Hibernate implementation, do I need to change service class? Yes, I need to change the service class, because in my service class I created a variable of type employee DAO using JDBC, right? Now when the requirement came saying we want to use Hibernate, what I will be doing is I will be writing another implementation of DAO. Here this is employee DAO using JDBC, right? I will write another class employee DAO using Hibernate. Implements same interface. So I will be writing a Hibernate implementation of same DAO. So there is some change inside the data access layer. I made some changes. I introduced some new classes, but that is affecting service class. So tomorrow if I want to use Hibernate implementation, what I need to do? Here I need to say employee DAO using Hibernate this class, right? Now here I need to introduce. Here I need to initialize this variable with Hibernate DAO implementation, right? So when one layer changes, the other layers are also getting affected, right? So here I can say that my service class is tightly coupled with JDBC implementation of employee DAO. Do you agree? Yes, tight coupling is there, right? So what we want is loose coupling. The service class implementation should not be tightly coupled with any of the implementation. We want some implementation of employee DAO, that's all. Whether it is JDBC implementation or whether it is Hibernate implementation or whether it is JPA implementation, my service class should not bother. Right? My service class should be loosely coupled with the DAO. Right? So what all changes shall I do here? Yes. Here, instead of declaring this dependency type as class type, I will make it as interface. Employee DAO is interface, right? The variable type should be of interface type. Right? So is the problem solved now? Suppose here instead of using employee DAO using JDBC, I say employee DAO. The variable is of type interface. Is the problem solved? No? Again here is the place where I am initializing it, right? I am using new operator to create an object. Again here I need to change the code to create an object of employee DAO using Hibernate. So two places I need to take care. First thing is, if I want to develop a loosely coupled code, there are two things which we need to keep in mind. The dependency type should always be interface type, right? And we should not initialize different objects on our own. We should delegate the object creation to some third party, right? We should not create objects in our code. We should delegate the object creation to some third party. So we already know, I guess you might have worked with some factory designs, factory design patterns. Factory is a class which will create objects, right? So what I could do is, instead of me creating an object here, I will create an object using a factory, right? See the solution. See the solution. This is the solution which I propose for loosely coupled code. If I want my employee service to be loosely coupled with any implementation of DAO, the variable type is interface type, and here I am not initializing interface reference by using new operator. I am delegating the object creation to a class called as factory class. Right? If I follow these two rules, my code will be loosely coupled. Right? But here in this case, I wrote my own factory class. I wrote my bean factory. Right? Here in this case, the logic of bean factory is very simple here. I will be writing a properties file called as beans.properties, where here I am initializing employee DO is a key to employee DO is in JDBC. Employee service is a key to employee service input, right? Then my bean factory code is having, my bean factory class is having a method called as getBean, which is taking a key. This getBean method might read from the .properties file. Based on the key, I guess key is employee DAO. What is the value of employee DAO in properties file? Employee DAO is in JDBC. So my factory can read from this configuration file, beans.properties. According to key, if I pass employee DAO, it should return an object of employee DAO using JDBC. If I pass employee service to getBean method, it should return me an object of employee service, right? So this is how I can write my own factory. A simple implementation to give you an idea. Tomorrow, tell me, is this code loosely coupled now correctly? What if I want to use hibernate implementation of employee DAO tomorrow? Where do I need to change? In the properties file, I need not touch this code. I will never change this code. I just change. Tomorrow, if I want to use hibernate implementation, I just change the properties file, and here I write employee DAO is in. So that's it. So my employee service is not tightly coupled with any implementation of DAO, right? So finally, I'll summarize. To make our code loosely coupled, dependency should be of type interface. Don't create objects on your own. Delegate object creation to a factory class. Right? So here we understood the importance of programming to interfaces. Our program, the dependency should be always of interface type. Interface reference can point to any implementation runtime. Right? So Mr. Rod Johnson has found the importance of programming to interfaces. If you program to interfaces, then your code will be loosely coupled. So he found the importance of programming to interfaces, and he started writing his own factory implementation. Why should I write my own factory? If there is some ready-made factory which I can readily use, it will be very easy, right? So the basic idea of Spring started with an implementation of a factory class. So he started implementing his own factory, and he started a framework. Framework means what? Some libraries which we can readily use, which will provide us some set of services. It's nothing but framework, right? So he started Spring framework, and his company name was Interface 21, meaning 21st century interfaces. That tells about the importance of programming to interface. Later it was renamed to Spring. Right. So Spring is a framework. Basically, it started with a factory implementation, right? So now the idea is, why to use Spring? First of all, now till now, what's the idea? Why do we use Spring? Because it gave a factory implementation. It gave us a ready-made factory. So we can use a factory which will read from an XML file. Nowadays, we prefer XML configuration, right? Because if I write configuration XML, that XML can be validated against a DTDR schema. Right? So nowadays we are preferring XML configuration. The factory given by Spring Framework will read from an XML configuration file and can create objects, and it does a lot more. The basic idea is to create objects, but the factory given by Spring is not only creating objects, it is doing a lot. We'll see what it is doing more. This is a simple example. Any doubts till now? To go ahead with a simple example, let me introduce you to Spring Source Toolsuite. Spring Source Toolsuite is based on Eclipse. It's an IDE which you will be using right now. It's based on Eclipse. These Spring people, what they have done is they have written plugins for Eclipse so that we can create the XML files easily, and we'll get a lot of help from the IDE. So to take advantage of those help, we'll use Spring Source Toolsuite. Spring Source's Toolsuite is nothing but Eclipse with plugins, that's all, nothing else. If you know Eclipse, Spring Source Toolsuite is same. So I'm just extracting it. Just extract it. No need to install the Spring Source Toolsuite. I have extracted, and in Spring Source folder, there is a folder called as STS. Just open it and open this sts.exe. It will open our IDE. So I just want to give a simple example. This is a Spring Source Toolsuite. It's nothing but Eclipse, right? Spring Source Toolsuite. It comes up. If you go to Java E mode, it comes up with a default server, Tomcat server, which is again written according to Spring. They have modified the actual Tomcat. Tomcat is open source, right? They have customized Tomcat and they are using Tomcat internally. You need not use external Tomcat. You can use this Tomcat server. This Tomcat server customized for Spring. If you are writing a normal Java application, you can just use it. We are not anyway going to develop web applications right now. Okay, so I'll write a new project and I'll add Spring libraries. So if you want to use Spring, I need to add Spring libraries in the build path. In the shared folder, I have given you the release the distribution. So the latest one is 3.1.x is a, but I have downloaded this one 3.0.6. I'm extracting it here. Here Spring Framework distribution is there with documentation. I have extracted this Spring Framework document with documentation, and here you have a dist folder where you have all the jars for each module. There are various modules which I am going to discuss after some time. But for each module there is a jar here in the dist folder, meaning the distribution. You can add the corresponding jars into your build path. But these jars might be having some dependencies on third-party jars. So we need to include those jars also in the build path. So what we need to do is we need to download two jars, two distributions, Spring Framework distribution, and also there is one more distribution which has dependencies. So we need to download that also, and we need to add those libraries. So for not wasting our time, what I have done is I have given you a folder in which I have added all the required jars, right? So what we will do is we will just add all these jars to our build path directly, and we'll start working. Just not in order to not waste time. Okay, I'm creating a new project, new Java project. Here I can create a Spring project also, but first I'll create a Java project and we'll turn it to a Spring project. 01. I'll say first Spring. Just I want my projects to be ordered, so I am using 01 as first. Okay, I'm adding all the libraries. Whatever libraries I have given to you. So now let me tell about the task, whatever I want to do. I want to give a simple demo on how you can do write a loosely coupled application by using a factory, a basic application. So I'll extend the same example to discuss about various concepts. To discuss about very simple functionality, I have a simple example. I want a class which will give me some sequences to be inserted inside my database. So generally in our databases we will be having some primary keys which we want to generate automatically. Like if I have a bank account, bank account number should be automatically generated, right? So I want a sequence of bank accounts to be generated. According to my logic, the bank accounts should be starting with some 3 letters, A, B, C something. So it should start from say 1000 XYZ. This should be my first account, right? And I want another account number. If I want another account number, ABC 1001 XYZ, ABC 1002 XYZ. So I want numbers to be generated in sequence. Is it not in sequence? Yes. In sequence there is a prefix ABC, suffix XYZ, and there is a value which is actually incrementing, right? So what I want is I want a class which will generate such sequences, right? But the aim is the prefix should be decided, prefix should be changed at runtime. I should be able to change the prefix without changing the code. I should be able to change suffix without changing the code. I should be able to change the initial value of my sequence without changing the code. This is the requirement, right? So let's see how to do it. I'm just writing a new class, sequence generator. A new Java class. In a package com.mysys, I'll say. You can also type parallel with me, or you can just see a very simple example to demonstrate the concepts. And I want to write a method public return type is string get sequence. That's all. I'll be calling this method many times. I want those sequences like that. So my sequence generator, is it dependent on some things? Yes, it should be provided with what is the prefix, what is the suffix, and what is the initial value. So I should be able to configure them through my configuration file without changing the code. So my sequence generator has some dependencies on prefix. So dependencies I'll create like this: private string prefix, private int initial value, and private string suffix. And this get sequence, it will just return simply prefix plus initial value plus plus plus. So that's it. Not much business logic here for generating the sequences, right? The concept is, how can I configure prefix, suffix, and initial value to the sequence generator, and how to use the factory to create object of sequence generator. This is the concept which you are learning. Give getters and setters. Okay. So I have created a class, and I want to create an object of sequence generator, not by using new. I want the object of sequence generator to be created by a factory given by Spring. Right? Tell me, before I go ahead, I want to ask you one question. What is a bean? Any Java class can be called as a bean? Or is there some restriction on bean? Yeah, a class which have variable setters and getters. Any class which has variable setters and getters, can I call it as a Java bean? Default constructor. So to strictly speak, if a Java class has default constructor, we can create it by using reflection, right? If there is a parameterized constructor, without knowing what to pass to the constructor, can I create an object? No. So if a class is having a default constructor, object of that class can be created by using reflection API, and also we can call the getters and setters by using reflection API, because getters and setters will be following some convention, right? If the variable name is x, what is the getter name? Set. So get capital X, set capital X. So if you are following the convention of getters and setters, then class which has default constructors is called as a bean, because bean is something which is reusable. Anything which is reusable is called as a bean, right? A Java class which is reusable is called as a Java bean. A Java class which is reusable at enterprise level is called as EJB, enterprise Java bean. So anything which is reusable is basically a bean. But can I say all Java classes are Java beans? Strictly speaking, no. It should have a default constructor. If there is no default constructor, it is not 100% reusable. You should know what parameters to pass to constructor, right? So strictly speaking, a Java class which has a default constructor is a Java bean, right? And generally it's a good convention to make all our variables private and give public getters and setters accordingly, right? But nowadays people are using the word bean loosely, very loosely. Every Java class they call it as a Java bean nowadays. Strictly speaking, it should have a default constructor, right? So every Java class is a Java bean nowadays. Everybody is calling it. So now, what can I name a factory which is creating beans? Bean factory. So in Spring there is an interface called as bean factory. Let me show you the documentation. Here in this framework there is one folder called as docs. Under that, Java doc API. In that you have the Java documentation. So let's see from the documentation perspective. I'll introduce you to some interfaces. See, this is Java documentation for Spring. There is a package called as org.springframework.beans.factory, and here is a basic interface called as bean factory. So first Spring started with this interface, the first interface ever. This interface is having lot of sub interfaces and also lot of implementing classes, right? We want a bean factory which can read the XML file, right? So the implementation which we generally use is XML bean factory. This XML bean factory can read the bean definitions from an XML, right? Okay, let's see how to use this XML bean factory. Before I go ahead, I said the beans have to be configured in XML. Beans means classes. Okay, so to configure, what I will do is right click on source, new, other, new. Here it is. There is one option, Spring Bean configuration file, right? So I take that option and I can give any name. I will give beans.xml. Next, don't worry about what is this XSD and all, it will come later. Just take next and finish. Take all defaults and finish. Yeah, see, I have got an XML file. Now did you see that the project earlier it was having J, meaning Java project. Once I created Spring Bean configuration file, it is renamed with S. That means it turned automatically to a Spring project. So I created an XML file. Now this is the Spring Bean configuration file. This XML is following some XSD, Spring beans.xsd, right? So here I will be configuring a bean tag. bean, I will write class is equals to sequence generator I will give some ID for identifying it. ID is equals to say sequence generator. Now just I configured my class in this XML. So my factory, what it can do is, if I give this key, it can create an object of sequence generator. Let's see with this basic configuration. There's still something more to configure. With this configuration, let me get an object of sequence generator by using factory. Later I'll modify this XML. Okay, so I'll create a new class where I can show you a demo of how to do it. Main. Here I am not using any layers. Directly I am showing you how to use a factory as a simple example. So here, first thing what I need to do is I want to create an object of factory. So I'll create a reference of bean factory. Bean factory is the interface. Is equals to what is the implementation? If I want to use XML bean factory. But remember, in earlier versions of Spring 2.x, they were asking us to use this XML bean factory. But now we are using 3.x version of Spring. This is deprecated actually, right? But for learning, let me just create it. I'll just change this code afterwards to use the best class, best implementation. So here this is actually deprecated, but still I'm using it for now. New XML bean factory is deprecated, so you are seeing this striked off symbol. XML bean factory. If you understand about this XML bean factory, you can understand the next thing easily. So what is the constructor for XML bean factory? It's taking a resource. From which resource to read the bean definitions? From XML resource, right? See this resource. What is this resource? It's again a interface, right? And there are a lot of implementations of resource. My XML file can be in class path, or it can be at some HTTP URL location, or it can be on some file system, right? There are various places where my XML configuration file can be. Suppose if my XML file is in class path, I can use class path resource implementation, right? And if I have my XML file in some URL at some other HTTP / something, then I can use URL resource. If my XML file is somewhere on the C drive or D drive, not in class path, then I can use file system resource. Or if I am using a web application, generally when using web application, we will be keeping our XML files under WebInf, then we can use servlet context resource. There are various implementations of resource. We have to decide which implementation to use depending upon our scenario. Now I have my beans.xml inside my class path in src folder. So I can use class path resource. I'll say new class path resource and I'll pass the file name. That's all, beans. So after this line, the XML file is read. Beans.xml file is read. Then the factory knows about the bean definitions. So what I can do is simply bean factory dot. There's a method called as get bean. If I use this one, what is the bean ID I give? Sequence generator. If I give the ID, it will give me the object of the class. So I'll take it sequence generator. But I need to typecast it because getBean is returning object type. If I am using this getBean method, I need to typecast it. But there is one more overloaded getBean method which is taking class type. So I'll give sequence generator dot. So now I need not typecast. So I use this getBean method. Very simple. I will write like this: system.out.println sequence generator dot, there's a method called as get sequence. So I'll call this get sequence 3 times. That's how I'm calling get sequence. First time, we just run it. Okay, running. Why am I getting null 0 null, null 1 null, null 2 null? Yes. So what I did when I say get bin, what is the factory doing? It's just creating an object of sequence generator by using reflection API. Just giving the object. It invokes a default constructor. So the value of prefix is null. Initial value is int. It's 0. This is null, right? But what I want is, whenever my factory is giving me a bin, it should be ready to use, right? That means all dependencies have to be initialized. They don't need to be ready to use, right? So what I want to do is, in my XML file itself, I want these values to be given, right? There are two values to initialize these dependencies. There are two ways. By calling setter method, here there is set prefix, set initial value, set suffix. So I can configure the XML file like this. I can write a property tag, name is equals to prefix. I want the prefix to be ABC. I'll write property tag name is equals to suffix, value is equals to whatever I want, XYZ, then property name is equals to initial value. I'll just give 1000. So if I write property tags, what will happen? I'm saying factory.getBin. I'm asking the bin by giving an ID. In this case, what will happen is, it will create an object of sequence generator through factory. For every property tag, it will call a corresponding setter method and pass the value. So sequence generator object is created by the default constructor. Then set prefix is called with ABC, set suffix, set initial value. Then the object is ready to use, the factory will return me that object. Right? So let me just run it. Now let's see. Yep, see I'm getting it, right? Without changing my sequence generator code, can I change my prefix, suffix and initial value? Yes, just by changing the XML, right? So this was the basic idea with which Spring started, right? Just do it. Once you are here, let me just tell you one more thing here itself. I said that XML Bean Factory is deprecated. That means there should be a better alternative than XML Bean Factory when they are deprecated. Let us talk about that. See here in the API, for Bean Factory, there are a lot of sub-interfaces. Application context is a sub-interface of Bean Factory, right? So can I say that if a class is implementing application context, it is also a Bean Factory? Yes. But this application context interface is having some more methods. So a class which is implementing this application context will be having all the implementations of methods in Bean Factory as well as some extra, right? So application context is created to provide much more services than what Bean Factory is providing us, right? We'll talk about what all services are provided with examples slowly, but just at this point understand that application context is providing much more services than Bean Factory, right? Example, Bean Factory cannot recognize annotations, but application context can recognize annotations, right? Nowadays we are preferring annotations over XML configurations, right? So if you are using XML Bean Factory, annotations cannot be used, right? So nowadays we are preferring application context. Now Which implementation of application context to use? Again, here you can see class path XML application context. If your XML is in class path, then you can use class path XML application context. Or if your XML is somewhere on your file system, like in C drive, D drive, wherever, you can use file system XML application context. Or if it is a web application, what you can do is you can use XML web application context. Or if it's a portal application, you can use XML portal application. There are a lot of implementations, but generally we use class path XML application context when writing non-web application. For web applications anyway, internally this will be used. Whenever we are writing non-web applications, we will use class path XML application. So here in the same program, what I will do is I will just change this line. I will just initialize this bean factory to new class path XML application context. There is a one constructor just taking name of the config location. I'll give beans dot. Now if I run, the output will be same, but we are using another implementation of bean factory. This implementation can read annotations. Till now we have not used annotations, so we don't find any difference now, right now. Now, if you see this XML file, who is creating object of your beans? Factory. Your bean is dependent on something. Who is initializing the dependencies? Factory. Factory or application context implementation. Application context is also one type of factory, right? So factory is responsible for creating your beans and initializing your dependencies. So another word which we use for initializing the dependencies is injecting your dependencies. The values for your dependencies are injected here by calling setter methods, right? So if injection of dependencies are done by calling setter methods, we call that type of injection as setter injection, right? The factory is doing dependency injection. It is injecting the dependent values. In dependency injection, there are various types of dependency injection. The most popularly used ones are setter injection, and another one is constructor injection. Right now, if you are writing a property tag here in the configuration file, the dependent values are injected by calling setter methods. So we are doing setter injection, right? Okay. Again, let me introduce you to one more terminology. We understood what is dependency injection. Initializing dependencies is called as dependency injection. Who is doing dependency injection? Factory. How is it doing dependency injection? By calling setter method. So this type of dependency injection is called as setter injection, right? And let me introduce you to some of the terminology. What is a container? You might have used a lot of containers like server container, JSP container, EJB container. What is the basic meaning of a container? Even you might have used applet container if you have developed applets. So what is a container? Why we call that as a container? So the word container is being used at many places till now. So why we call something as a container? Servlet container, is it providing some services? Yes, what services is it providing? Is it managing the life cycle of servlets? Right? EJB container, it manages the life cycle of EJBs. So container can be anything which manages the life cycle, like applet container also. Applet also has life cycle. The life cycle of applet also is managed by applet container. So container is something which manages the life cycle, right? Here also in Spring, the beans which we configure will be having some life cycle. We will be discussing about the life cycle of the bean slowly going ahead, but just understand the factory class which we are using will be managing the life cycle of your beans. So can we call that factory as a container? So Spring is coming up with two types of containers. Containers which are implementing bean factory interface are first type. Containers which are implementing application context interface are second type. Two containers. Factories are nothing but containers because they are managing the life cycle. So now I can use this word now from now onwards. Spring container is managing the life cycle of the beans. Spring container is responsible for creating objects. Spring container is responsible for injecting the dependencies. Right? Let me know if you have any doubts till now in the terminology. So let me introduce you to one more terminology. In an application, if I am not using Spring, who is responsible for creating objects? Who is responsible for injecting the dependent variables? We should do manually. We should manually create objects and we should call setter methods manually. So in a normal scenario without using Spring, the developer, we are responsible for creating objects and injecting the dependencies. But when using Spring, container is responsible for creating objects and injecting the dependencies. Right? So here it is inverse of a normal scenario. When using Spring, it is inverse of a normal scenario, right? So here we call this concept where a container is responsible for doing everything as inversion of control. What container is doing? It is doing inversion of control. And dependency injection is one form of inversion of control. Right? So inversion of control is a term being used to tell that the container is inversing the control. When you are using Spring container, the control is in the hands of the container, not in the developer. We are not injecting dependencies. Container is injecting dependencies. So they coined this term, inversion of control. Martin Fowler, the person who first used this term was Martin Fowler. He introduced the word called as IOC, inversion of control. It's just a term being used to describe about this scenario where container is responsible for creating objects and injecting dependencies. Right? While doing inversion of control, what container has to do? It has to inject the dependencies. So that's why we call dependency injection is one type of IOC, inversion of control. There are other types of IOC which we will see next. Like we will be seeing AOP, aspect oriented programming. So that also is one type of IOC. Right? Any other doubts till now? Till afternoon we will be concentrating on a core module of Spring called as IOC. Spring IOC is a core module of Spring which talks about various ways of injecting the dependencies and various ways of configuring the beans inside the Excel. So I introduce you the first module, Spring Core, which will talk about IOC. Right? So earlier in Spring Core, first when they developed, there was no application context. When they introduced application context, they added one more module called as context module. So the file which represents your context module is, see here, there is one thing called as context and context support. In these jars there are implementations of application. Right? These are the modules. Right. Now let me talk about other type of injections. In this case, I am injecting a dependency by calling setter methods, right? I don't want the dependencies to be injected by calling setter methods. I want the dependencies to be injected through constructor. Yes, it is possible. So what I'll do is, to my sequence generator class, I will write one default constructor as well as parameterized constructor, generating the constructor automatically. So there are two constructors for creating sequence generator. Now what I want to do is, I want the variables to be initialized by calling this parameterized constructor. So what to do? in my beans.xml I will just comment this, then I'm going to use constructor arg value is equals to, what is the 0th argument? Prefix I want it to be ABC. I'll say index is equals to 0, 0th argument, this is the value to be passed. Then at second index I have int, so at index 1 I'll say 1000, and at index 2 I'll say XYZ. So if you are writing constructor arg tags, there are 3 constructor arg tags. So what the factory, what the container will do is it will search for a constructor which is taking 3 arguments, and it will try to call that constructor version. Right? By using reflection API, we can also call parameterized constructor. So in this case, the container is calling a parameterized constructor which is taking 3 parameters and will pass accordingly. So here we are doing constructor injection. Now I'll run the same program, the output will be same. Yeah, the output is same, but we have done constructor injection. Do it. Tell me which is better way of injecting, using constructor or using setters? Constructor? Why? Yes, correct. Answer is correct. But why? One thing is reduces the call. But what in my setter method if I want to execute some logic? Before setting a variable, if I want to execute some logic, I don't want to set directly. Here in this case, setter method is not doing anything. But in my setter method, I may want to write some logic, and if some logic is satisfied, then only I want to initialize this variable. Same thing can be done inside my constructor also, right? That's also correct. So I'll put it, you both are correct. I'll put your, combine your points and tell you. A class may be having some mandatory dependencies and non-mandatory dependencies. Some of the dependencies may not be mandatory sometimes, right? If you are using setter injection, if you are not using constructor injection, if you are using property tags, what if you forget to write a property tag for a particular variable? When the container is getting started, will you get any exception or will you get runtime exception? We'll get runtime exception. If suppose some dependency is not injected, we may get some runtime exception. So there is a possibility that I may not write a property tag. So it will not give me exceptions while deploying my application, but at runtime I will get an exception. But if I am using constructor, right, what will happen? At compile time only it will not agree. Suppose if I try to give only 2 constructors, see here, see it's giving me a error. If I don't give a parameter, it is giving me an error, right? So if you want all the dependencies to be mandatory, then better go for constructor. But if you have some mandatory dependencies and non-mandatory dependencies, then better you go for setter. So depending upon your scenario, if you want all the dependencies to be mandatory, then you go for constructor injection, or else you can go for, can I use a combination of both? So see, what I'll do is I'll write one more property tag also here and give the prefix value as DEF. So what will happen? Tell me, what will be the final value for prefix? So what happens whenever I get bean, the container tries to create an object or sequence generator using this constructor. Constructor which is taking 3 parameters. Then this is a property type. Setter method is automatically called. For every property, setter method. So first ABC is given, then again setter method is initializing it to DF. So final value will be DF. So you can use a combination of both constructor and setter injections also. Any doubts? Fine. So till now we have injected simple text. String is a simple type. Int is a simple type. We know how to inject simple text, but how to inject some other means, that's a simple example, right? Now, in this case, my prefix is hard coded. My prefix is either ABC, right? I don't want to give a standard prefix. I want the prefix to be generated dynamically, right? What I want is, I want prefix to be the current date on my system in dd/mm/yyyy format. Same program today if I run, prefix will be 9/5/2012. Same program without doing any changes, if I run tomorrow, the prefix will be 9/10/2012, right? So the current date on my system should be used as a prefix. That's my requirement. So prefix should not be hard coded, it should be dynamically created, right? So what I'll do, see the scenario. The prefix should be generated dynamically, right? So prefix cannot be a string. Now what I will do is, I will write another interface called as prefix generator. In that, I'll have one method called as get prefix, which will return your string, the prefix, right? And I'll have an implementation of it, which will return the date. Now, if I have to write it, new interface I'll start, prefix generator. I will write a variable, a method public, return type is string, get prefix. Okay, this is a method. I'll tell you about the implementation later. But now tell me what all changes to be done in my sequence generator. I'll comment this. I'll make private prefix generator. Now my sequence generator is dependent on prefix generator, right? And I'll remove this constructor for now. I'll remove the getters and setters for now. And tell me here what I should do. Prefix generator dot. So whenever I'm calling get sequence, I'm saying prefix generator dot get sequence. This is my business method, which is having some business logic here. My business logic is dependent on prefix generator. Prefix generator is not a simple type. It is not a string or int. It can be a reference of some other meaning, right? So I'll just give getters and setters for prefix generator. Right? Then going to XML. Should I remove this? Okay, anyway the constructor I removed. I'll remove this. So now the property name is prefix generator. I have to give the value. What would be the one? I should inject it with a value of some implementation of prefix generator. Prefix generator interface. I should write one implementation and I should inject the object of that prefix generator here. Right? Let's see how I do it. I'm going to create an implementation of prefix generator now. New class date prefix generator. Implements prefix generator, and here simply I'll just return new date dot toString. Right now, this will not give in dd mm yy format. Right now, it will just give string representation of data object. Right? So now what I want to do is I want to configure this as a bean in my XML date prefix generator. So I'll configure one more bean here. Class is equals to date prefix generator. ID is equals to date prefix generator. Is it having any dependencies now? Nothing. Right now there are no dependencies, so I can just do it like this. And here for prefix generator I should give a reference of ref is equals to. So this is how to inject the reference of some other bean. Date prefix generator is one bean and prefix generator is injected with it. Right? So this is a way to inject one bean inside other. Now just run the demo, it should work. Program, how the flow goes. Here I am asking for, see here, first I am creating an object of class path XML application context. Right? Remember, all the beans are loaded eagerly by application context. What do I mean by application context is loading all the beans eagerly? When this line is executed, it will read the XML file. In XML file there are some bean definitions. You will try to create all the beans and keep them in memory. So even though you are not saying get bean, the bean objects are created in memory and they are ready. So application context will by default load all the beans eagerly. There is one small if class I will tell you. By default it will load all the beans eagerly. Right? So in this case when first line is executed, it will try to create an object of sequence generator. Will it use parameterized constructor or default? Default. Because there is no constructor or tag. Default constructor is called. Then it will try to call set prefix generator. But prefix generator is a reference of date prefix generator, right? So before calling setter method of prefix generator, what it will do? It will try to create this bean. Right? It will create an object of date prefix generator is in default constructor. There is no constructor. Then the object of date prefix generator is passed to setter method of prefix generator. Then set suffix is called. Right? So all the dependencies are created and all the beans are created and all dependencies are injected during the startup of my container. Class path XML application context is nothing but Spring container. When my Spring container is starting up, just after this object is created, all the beans are created and they are in memory. Right? But whereas when using XML bean factory earlier, when using XML bean factory, once this first line is executed, it will just read the XML file. Beans are not created. Right? So one more difference between bean factory and application context is bean factory will lazily load all the beans. Application context will eagerly load all the beans. That means if you are using XML bean factory, when is the bean created? Whenever you call get bean, whenever you try to access it, then only a bean object is created by XML bean factory. But application context will load all the beans eagerly. It will not wait until you call get bean. That is one difference between bean factory container and application context container. Right? Any doubts till now? Still there is something more to improve, but I have one more basic question before I go ahead. Tell me the answer for this. Now let's sequence generator 1. Now, how many objects of sequence generator class are created? 1 or 2? Only 1. Because application context has created an object of sequence generator at this line only. It's there in the memory. So whenever you ask, it will give the same reference. Now sequence generator this reference and this reference are pointing to same object, right? So by default, your application context will treat all your beans as singletons. I think you know about singleton design pattern. Singleton, according to singleton design pattern, a class for which you can create only one object is called as singleton class. But actually, is my sequence generator a singleton class? No, it is not a singleton class actually. But container will treat all beans as singletons. It will treat. It will not try to create second object. It will create only one object. Right? This is by default. But sometimes you may want a new object every time. Whenever you say get bean, you want a new object sometimes. So in that cases, you can say for bean tag, you can say scope is equals to, by default it is singleton. If you specify it or not, by default scope is equal to singleton. But if you want a new object every time, then you have to say scope is equals to prototype. Prototype means whenever you say get bean, you will get a new object, a new fresh object, right? So you understood two values for scopes: singleton, prototype. Default scope is singleton. And in web applications, you may use request scope. That means for one request, one object. Right? So in web applications, this scope is equal to request will work only in web applications. Right? Or you can say scope is equals to session also. Again, the meaning is implicit, I guess. For one user session, one bean will be created by the container. So there are four scopes: singleton, prototype, request, session. Request and session are only related to web applications. By default, the scope is singleton, and if you want a new bean every time, you can say scope is equal to prototype. And once you understand about singleton and prototype, tell me, guess, when this first line is executed, I told if I am using application context, all the beans are loaded eagerly, right? Do you think that sequence generator bean is loaded eagerly now if I say scope is equals to prototype? If I say scope is equals to prototype, will that object of sequence generator be created during startup? No, because whenever I say get bean, I want a new bean, right? There will be no use even if this object is created during the startup of the container. So by default, application context will eagerly load only singleton beans, not prototype beans. Right? By default, application context will eagerly load all singleton beans only, not prototype beans. Few more things I'll tell in the same thing here. In my example, when I run my demo, I'm getting the output. So I'm getting the output like Wednesday, September 5, 11, 25, 57. But I don't want the date to be in that format. I want it to be in dd/mm/yy format, right? So I don't want date like this. So see here what I can do in my date prefix generator. Here in get prefix I need to format the date, right? To format the date there is date formatter. So there is a class called as date formatter. Date format is equals to new. Date format is an abstract class, so there is an implementation called as simple date format, for which we can specify the format dd/mm/yyyy. Then what I can do is I can just say date format dot format. If I pass date, it will give me a string object. I'll pass new date. So this is how we format normally. So I wrote like this. Let's see whether it will work or not really. Will I get the date in ddmmyyyy format? Yep, I got it, right? But there is a small problem with this code. Tell me what's the problem with this code if you find anything. Here I am hard coding the format. So I don't want to hard code the format. The format also should be configured inside. So what I'll do is I'll just comment out this line and keep date format as the instance variable. Private date format, and I'll give setter method. Getter method is not anywhere required. Setter method is required. So now can I say that my date prefix generator is dependent on date format? Yes, it's dependent on date format. There is a setter method also. So can I inject date format to XML? Yes. So what I'll do is I'll create simple date format in XML. I'll configure. So let me go to XML. I'll create a bean. Class is equals to simple date format. But how did I create simple date format earlier? By passing the value to constructor. So can I use constructor injection for initializing this simple date format? So we'll just do it. Is there a property for that? Okay, I'll use constructor injection. There's only one constructor parameter, value is equals to, I'll say dd hyphen mm hyphen yy. And I'll give some ID df. I'll say the ID is df. And here I want to inject it through setter method, so I'll just write property tag, name is equals to date format, ref is equals to df, right? So I'm injecting date format into date prefix generator. Date prefix generator is injected into sequence generator, right? Who is responsible for doing all this? Container. So container, I can use a term. Container is wiring all my beans. All my beans are wired by the container. Another name for dependency injection is wiring. Beans are wired by the container, right? So when is this wiring done? Here in this case I am using application context. The wiring is done during the startup. Whenever I create an object of application context, the wiring is done, right? The container is wiring all the beans. Now if you run the program, the output will be same. Output is same. I got dd hyphen mm hyphen yy. Any doubts? But don't you think this XML configuration is going too much? If my class is having some 10 properties, then I write 10 property tags. So we want some shortcut of doing it. We are just lazy. We don't want to write big configurations. So there is a shortcut for writing property tags. Okay, I'm just showing it. Go to namespaces. Here there is a tab called as namespaces. Click on this namespaces. You will be seen. You will be shown this window. Okay. Here down in the XML file you got namespaces. Select it. Then select a checkbox with name P. There is a name called as, there is a tag for P. It will give an error. Okay. It will ask you, say OK. Okay. Then come back to source again. See here, there is one namespace added to your XML. P namespace. XMLNS colon P. Right? Just you can do it manually also instead of going to namespace and doing. You can just add this namespace, but we don't remember this all URLs, so we can go to here and select whatever namespace we want to be included inside your XML. So here I added P schema. So what I'll do is here in this case I don't want to write property tags. I'll just comment it for now. I'll say P colon control space. P colon control space initial value. There are two things. Initial value, P colon initial value, P colon initial value hyphen ref. P colon prefix generator, P colon prefix generator hyphen ref. P colon suffix hyphen ref. Automatically coming, right? So when to use hyphen ref? If it is reference to some other bean. If it is a simple type like string, int, float, double, boolean, we can just use P colon the variable name. So P colon initial value is a simple type. I want to give 1000 space P colon suffix XYZ and P colon prefix generator is not a simple type, it is a bean, right? So for that we have to use hyphen ref is equals to get prefix generator, right? So it seems to be a single line. Instead of writing property tags, we always prefer to use P colon. P schema. Just try to do, just removing everything and just keeping it in a single line. Here also, for this date prefix generator also I can use P colon date format hyphen ref is equals to the configuration became a bit simple when using P schema. Functionality is same, just to simplify the XML configuration. You can use this only for setter injection, not for constructor injection. For constructor injection, you have to use constructor arg tag only. There is no shortcut for constructor injection. So what I want is, I don't want to manually wire all the beans. Am I manually wiring the beans in my configuration? There are two beans. How is this bin wired with this bin? Here. This bin is wired to this bin here. I don't want to do it manually. I want the container to detect the dependencies and automatically wire the dependencies. So what I want is auto wiring. Automatically, container should understand the dependencies and inject the dependencies automatically. Let's see how to do that auto wiring. So for demonstrating that auto wiring, I will just delete the reference of date prefix generator here. I will just delete this also. Now, before I talk about it, tell me how many dependencies does this sequence generator have? By seeing the class, how can you decide the sequence generator is having some dependencies? Variables or setter methods? Setter methods. If there is a setter method in your bean class, that means the bean is having the dependency on that variable. Setter method means dependency. For a container, how does the container understand that there is a dependency? If there is a setter method. So if there is a setter method for prefix generator, so container understands, okay, sequence generator is having a dependency on prefix generator, right? Similarly, for date prefix generator, what all are the dependencies? Date format, because there is set date format. So from a container perspective, if there is a setter method, then that is a dependency, right? Okay, so now I want the dependencies to be automatically wired. I want date prefix generator to be wired inside sequence generator and date prefix to be wired inside, right? To do auto wiring, there are 4 options. We can do auto wiring by name. What do I mean by auto wiring by name? How to do it? See here in the bean tag, I can just say auto wire is equals to by name. I am specifying auto wire is equals to by name. That means whenever it sees auto wire tag and it's equals to by name, container understands, okay, I have to wire the dependencies automatically for the sequence generator. I said by name. What is the name of dependency for sequence generator? What is the name of the variable? Prefix generator. Name of the variable. Is there any period same name? Here it is date prefix generator, but the variable name is prefix. So whenever you want auto wiring by name, you have to make sure that the variable name is same as the bean ID. So my sequence generator is having prefix generator, so my bean ID should be so now whenever it is trying to create an object of sequence generator, it will understand, okay, I have to auto wire by name. What all dependencies are there for sequence generator? The variable name is prefix generator. You will see, is there any period same name? Now yes. So it automatically calls the setter method, right? Similarly for here, what is the name of the dependency? For this bin also I have to say auto wire is equals to so here the name of the dependency is date format, but the bin name is df. So I should follow the convention and rename it to date. So if you follow the convention in giving bin names same as the dependency names, then auto wiring will happen, right? So now let me run this demo again. Will it work without an exception? Yeah, it worked, right? But let me just show you. Instead of giving same name as a variable, I'll say df. Will it work now? Now I should get an exception, right? I'll run it again. I got null pointer exception where at this line date format is null. It was not injected. So whenever you are using auto wiring by name, you have to make sure that the dependency name is same as the bean name, right? Then only auto wiring by name will occur, right? But you may ask me, should I write auto wire is equal to by name, auto wire is equal to by name for each and every bean tag? Again, I want a shortcut. So I don't want to write auto wire is equal to by name everywhere. I'll remove it. In the beans tag, the root tag, you can just specify default auto wire is equals to by name. By default, the default auto wiring is by name. You need not specify auto wire is equals to by name, auto wire is equals to by name. You can specify the root tag is the default auto wiring configuration. Right now, just check if it still works by using default auto wire is equals to by name. Yes, it still works. Any doubts? Yeah, you can override. Again, if you give auto wiring another value, it will be overdone. Global configuration, you can always override. But generally in our application, we will stick to one type of auto wiring only. So that will specify it. Right? Okay, next auto wiring is by type. I think you understand by name itself. What auto wiring by type? Here, if it is auto wiring is equal to by type, what it will do? You see, is there any dependency for sequence generator? Yes. What is that prefix generator? What is the type of that variable? Type of that variable is prefix generator. So we'll see, is there any bean of type prefix generator? Yes. Date prefix generator is implementing prefix generator. So this is of same type, so automatically this is implemented. Right? When you are using by type, do you want to make sure that ID is same? Can I say PG? So when you are using auto wiring by type, ID can be anything. It will decide based on type of the bean. Right? I am expecting one doubt from you. Correct. That's what I am expecting. So if you declare another bean of same type, prefix generator, another class, which is implementing same interface, then you will get an exception. Right? So suppose if I write another bean like this, I say this PG1 and PG2, right? Two beans of same type. Of course, here in this case I am using same class. I might inject it with different values. Now, let me just run. I got an exception where what is it saying? No unique bean of type prefix generator is defined. Expected single matching bean but found two. Right? So whenever you are using by type, you have to make sure that there is only one bean of same type. If you have two beans of same type, you will get exceptions. In that case, you have to use by name. If there are two beans of same type, then you can use by name. Right? I'll delete this. Any doubts till now? So we understood two types of auto wiring: by name. Okay, so one more auto wire is by constructor. So here in this case, it will try to auto wire the dependencies by using appropriate constructor. Let me tell you this case very carefully, just listen, it's a bit confusing. So in my sequence generator, there is one public constructor which is not taking any parameter. I will use another constructor. Good. I will just use another construct which is taking only prefix generator, the dependency. So now there are two overloaded constructors, right? I said auto var is equals to, so now the dependency injection has to happen by using constructor, but which constructor to invoke is decided by the container based on some scenarios. I'll tell you the scenario, right? Whenever I say by constructor, container internally is using reflection API. It will get all the constructors. I will see. It will start with constructor which is having maximum number of parameters. You will try to see, can I invoke this constructor? There are two constructors in this case. It will get all the constructors, and it will start with the constructor which is having maximum number of parameters. And see, can I invoke it? If this has to be invoked, there should be a bean of type prefix generator node. So it will search, is there any bean of type prefix generator? If there is any bean of type prefix generator already configured, then it will inject prefix generator using this, right? Else it will use default constructor. So which constructor to use is decided by the container based on the scenario, right? Suppose if my sequence generator, let's assume simple, I'll give you private date format I will give another constructor which is taking both prefix generator and date format. Now tell me which constructor will be invoked in this case. There are three constructors. I said auto var by constructor, right? So my sequence generator is having a dependency on date format also. Did I give setter method? I should give setter method. My sequence generator is having two dependencies, prefix generator and date format. So I said auto var by constructor. There are three constructors. Which constructor you know this or this or this? As I said, it will start with constructor with maximum number of parameters. If it has to be invoked, it should know beans of this type. Does it know bean of type prefix generator? Date format? Yes, both are there. So this will be invoked. If there is no bean of type date format configured already, this will be invoked. If there is no bean of type prefix generator and date format, both this will be invoked. Right? So container will decide which constructor to use based on the number of parameters. It will start from the maximum number of parameters. The constructor is having maximum number of parameters.
There is a constructor with only two constructors with one parameter. One is having prefix generator as a parameter, that is the date format.
Then, okay, very good question. Suppose if there is a constructor which is taking only date format. Now let's assume that in your XML file there is no bean of type date format. So no confusion, this will be no. Suppose if there is no bean of type prefix generator, again there is no confusion, this is no. But both beans are there. Then we will say ambiguous constructor. So we throw an exception saying constructors are ambiguous. It does not know which constructor to invoke, so we will throw an exception. Okay?
So in this constructor, then I have one more constructor, which will take bar for the parameter.
Which will take
Bar argument. So it will be operator parameter.
Then again, yes. So you may say, but again you will specify type at least when you are specifying whereas.
No, I am saying object dot dot dot.
Object dot dot means object will match every bean, no?
I am saying for that case this constructor will be getting it.
Object dot dot dot. So I think it will never invoke because object will match all the beans. So it's ambiguous. Always ambiguous. It's always ambiguous, right?
No, it should not be that.
Right?
So Java it is supporting that. Java it will, if you pass that one, if you are constructor with the
maintainer does not understand. See, in Java it is valid syntax. I'm not saying it's giving, it will give compilation error.
It will support that. Actually, we can do it as
Yeah, okay, let's see. Okay, now in this case, let me check. Okay, I am having these two things, right? So let me just write system trace. Just to check which constructor is called. So now there are, in my XML I have both, right? There is one date prefix and one simple date format.
you have to write a setter method for it.
Yeah, okay. I'll write a setter method for date format. Okay, now I will run it. Which? The one which is taking SQL general is called 1 minute. Suppose if I keep this down, let me just okay, globally I'll say by const. Okay, for both. Getting null pointer exception at date prefix generated. Date format is not injected. Why? Okay. Let's say I will inject it. Now I will run it. It's always calling the one with prefix generator. Why 1 minute? in this case date format, if I just comment this prefix generator, date format one is called.
Whatever personal it is getting.
No, that's why I kept it down also.
Not in the settings.
Okay, if I paste it down, I'll just check why it is actually according to the concept it should invoke, it should give some error. I'll just check it, okay? So most of the times we will not be using constructor injection, we will be using by type or by name maximum practically. Because when it is constructor, we are not sure which constructor is exactly called, right? Okay, I'll talk about why it is giving why it is taking set prefix generator always after the break. Let us not waste time. Now there is one more saying at default. Default means the container will see, is this being having a default constructor? If default constructor is there, then writing this auto where as default is same as setter injection. Sorry, by type. If you write default, if this is having default constructor, non-parameters constructor, then default will look exactly same as by type. Otherwise, if there is a constructor, we try to call that constructor. We try to work as by constructor. That is the difference. So we understood about various types of auto wiring, right? So I'll just remove the various types of auto wiring. Now I'll talk about a new feature. For this sequence generator, is there any mandatory dependency? For confusion, to avoid confusion, I am removing all the constructors. For this sequence generator, is there any mandatory dependency? Is the date format mandatory? For sequence generator, there are two dependencies: prefix generator, date format. Date format is not mandatory generator, mandatory, right? Prefix generator is mandatory. If I decide to use setter injection, what I will do, I will write property tags. If I don't write property tag, setter method will not be invoked. If I write property tag, setter method will be invoked, right? So suppose in this XML I am not using auto wiring and I am not injecting by using property tag or p colon. So when the container is being built, all the singleton beans are loaded eagerly, right? When the container is being built, will I get an exception or not? Here I am not injecting a mandatory dependency. For me, I feel that prefix generator is mandatory dependency. Without that, my business logic will not work. But I didn't write p colon prefix generator hyphen ref, or I didn't even write property tag. So will I get any exception when the container is being built? So let's see. I got null pointer exception, but let me check again. I'll run the demo. I got null pointer exception at this time. Why? Prefix generator is not injected because I didn't write p colon or property tag, right? So I didn't get exception when my container is getting started. Generally, if it is a web application, what will happen when we deploy our web application? The container will be built. Container will start. At that time, it will be good. During deployment itself, it will say, if it says that you have forgotten to inject prefix generator, it will be good. But I'll get runtime exceptions in this case. When I start using it, I'll get runtime exceptions, right? So I feel that it is good if I get an exception saying this property is mandatory, you need to inject it when I am deploying my application, when my container is starting. Right now it is not coming, right? So if you want prefix generator to be mandatory, what you can do is on the setter method of prefix generator, you can use an annotation required. On the setter method, required annotation cannot be used on some annotations cannot be used on fields. That annotation can be used on only methods. So I have to write required annotation on the setter method of prefix. If I write, what the container will do when the Spring container is starting, if this dependency is not injected by a setter method, it will throw an exception saying this prefix generator is a required dependency. Right? Let us see whether it will do or not, or do I have to do something else to make it work. Oh, still I got null pointer exception. That means the container didn't say that it is a mandatory requirement, right? So the thing is, by default, annotations, required annotation is not recognized by my Spring container. By default, required annotation is not recognized. So what you have to do, in your XML file, you need to write one more bean. Class is equals to required annotation bean post processor. As the name says, we'll talk about post process a lot afterwards. As the name says, required annotation bean post processor. We'll talk more on post process later. If you configure this bean, then only required annotations will be recognized by your Spring container. Otherwise, no. So now after configuring this bean, I'll run the demo. So now I got an exception. What is it? Property prefix generator is required. I am not getting a runtime exception, null pointer exception. I am not getting it. So when the container is being built, at that point only I am getting an exception saying property prefix generator is required for being sequence generator, right? So whenever you have some mandatory dependencies which should be injected via setter methods, you can use required annotation on the top of that setter method, and you have to declare this bean. What is the bean? org.springframework.beans.factory.annotation.required annotation bean first. Do you feel that it is a big class to be remembered? Yes, of course, we don't remember this. So there is a shortcut. Instead of writing this bean tag, there is a shortcut. Go to namespaces and select a namespace with name context. Context namespace. Right? Then going to source, you can see that the namespace for context is added, and also the XSD for Spring context create1.xsd also is added. Right? So can I use the tags present inside this namespace? Yes. So I will write here context colon annotation hyphen config. That's it, simple. This tag says recognize annotations. Instead of you writing this bean tag, you don't remember this bean tag, just you can write context colon annotation config. Spring will understand that it has to recognize the annotation. Right? That is the shortcut. Context colon annotation config. I don't want to write this bean tag and this bean tag. I want container to recognize these classes itself as beans. Right? I don't want to write, I'll just comment. Simple date format is not my own class. These two are my own classes, right? I don't want to write a bean tag for this because they are my own classes, they are present in class path. I want container to be recognized. I want these classes to be recognized as beans automatically, right? So I just comment these two beans. Then going to sequence generator, I want container to recognize this class as a bean. So annotate it with component. That's all. If you annotate the class with component, it's equivalent to writing a bean tag in your XML. It's equivalent to writing this bean tag. I'll write it there itself. Writing component annotation on top of a class is equivalent to writing a bean tag like this. Bean class is equals to the class name, the qualified class name, com dot mysys dot generator, and every bean will have an ID. ID is same as the class name, but first letter small. So writing component annotation on top of a class is equivalent to writing this bean tag. Class anyway it knows, but ID is same as the class name. First letter is small by default, right? Similarly, I want date prefix generator also to be recognized as a bean. So component, right? But I need to tell to my container to scan for component annotations, right? I just annotated components. In the XML file, I'll just write a simple tag context colon component scan from base package comp. Now what this says is, I'm telling to container, start from this base package comp, go through its sub directories and look for a class annotated with components. If I say this, then it will start scanning, otherwise it will not scan for component annotations, right? Okay. That's equivalent to writing a simple bean tag, is it? Writing component tag on the class is equivalent to writing bean tag. But am I injecting dependencies? How to inject the dependencies, right? There are two ways. You can use auto wired on top of the field or on top of setter method. What this will do is, it will look for a bean of same type. Do I know any bean of same type? Yes, because on top of date prefix generator, I annotated it with component. It knows date prefix generator, right? So it will inject date prefix generator into prefix generator. So whenever I am using auto wire annotation, it is by type. It will try to find a bean of same type, right? And what about the simple types? Auto wiring means it is injecting that bean, but simple types I have to give. So for injecting simple types, we have annotation value I want the value to be initialized with, I want it to be initialized with 1000 and suffix should be initialized with x, y, z. So this is how to inject the dependencies using annotations. Right? Will these annotations be recognized by container? Why? Why will it recognize annotations? Because I have already written annotation config. It says to recognize all annotations. Right? If I don't say this again, those annotations will not be recognized. But let me just remove it. Okay, I'll remove it. I'll show you. Now coming to sequence generator, is this been fully configured now? This is treated as a bin. There are 3 dependencies. This is auto weight. Values are injected. Date format is not a mandated dependency format. I am just ignoring it. Okay, coming to date prefix generator, anything else? For date prefix generator, anything to be injected? Date format? How do I do it? Auto wired. And in XML I have, because this is not my own bin, right? I cannot go to that class file and annotate with component. So I just have to declare this bin. If some bin is not my own, I have to declare it. If it is my own bin, I need not declare it. I can use component annotation. Right? Now I will just run this. Let's see. Prefix generator is required bean. Okay, on top of setter method, I will now remove required annotation. I'll tell you why it came. Now I got the output. Now tell me, I have used annotations on top of field, right? Do you think setter methods are called? This is called as field injection. Internally, factory will use reflection API. By using reflection API, even we can access private fields also. Get the private field, initialize it with that value. So here, the container is doing field injection. It's not calling setter methods, right? So now you might have understood why I removed required annotation on top of setter. It will throw an exception if the setter method is not called. Generally, if setter method is called, we were assuming that the field is injected. But now here field injection is done, right? So now on top of setter method I should not write required because setter method is not called. Right? What I can do is I can use auto wired on top of setter method. In this case, what type of injection? Setter injection. Setter injection. If I am writing auto wired on top of setter method, in this case setter method will be called. Now setter injection is done. So you can use auto wired on top of a field injection is done. You can use auto wired on top of a setter method, setter injection is done. Or I can write auto wired on top of constructor also. Let a constructor I can use auto wired on top of constructor also. So in this case, constructor injection will be done. Right? So I expect one doubt from you. How annotation context was removed, right? If you write component scan, internally it will recognize annotation context. Suppose if you don't write component scan, what will happen? It will not scan for components, but auto wire annotation will be recognized. Auto wire annotation will not be recognized. So if you are writing component scan, no need to write annotation config, because internally container will recognize annotation if you write component scan. But if you don't write component scan, you have to write annotation config, otherwise annotations will not be recognized. How to give the name to my bin? I can give component and I can give here directly SG. If I don't give anything, by default name of the bin same as class name with first letter small. I can assign a name. This is the name of my sequence generator bin, right? Similarly, I can give the name of date prefix generator. I'll give the name as a DPG, date prefix generator, right? Now I want a bin with name DPG to be injected here. If I say auto wire, it is by type. If I want auto wiring by name, then I can say resource name is equals to DPG. Resource annotation can be used for auto wiring by name. But remember, see here, auto wired annotation is from Spring framework. Resource annotation is from Java X annotation. If you have worked with EJBs also, in EJB also we will use resource annotation. Resource annotation is given by J2E. So same annotation is used by Spring also here, just to comply with the standards, right? So this is not a Spring specific annotation. Spring is using J2E annotation. In even EJB 3, if you have worked, resource annotation is used for injecting by name. That's it. Any doubts till now? Just give scope directly. Prototype. Prototype means what? What is the meaning of prototype? Whenever you say get bin, it will give you a new value, new object. Singleton means only one bin will be there throughout your application. Prototype means one bin, whenever you say get bin, you will get a new bin. Values are injected anywhere, right? Whenever it is constructing a new bin, it will inject the values and then give it to you.